Men who instinctively take personal responsibility for themselves and their families eventually realize that being atomized, rootless cosmopolitans inhibits their ability to exercise their willpower. Male agency naturally leads into the creation of a patriarchy. Raise your sons to be strong, masculine, and dominant. Raise your daughters to be soft, feminine, and submissive. The bad behavior that we see from women today is simply a rebellion against men's failure to benevolently dominate them. The failure of Western society is a failure to maintain the patriarchy.
Well, good evening if you're in Australia, good morning if you're in the States, and good day wherever the hell you are on Earth. Welcome back to Patriarchy. This is the Patriarch Hour number 2 with Noah Revoy and myself, James Fox Higgins, on Rational Rise TV. Thanks for joining us, and good evening to you, Noah.
Yeah, it's a great being with you again. I think our last session went absolutely wonderfully. Got a lot of good feedback, and it's interesting because even a lot of people who had positive opinions about patriarchy didn't understand a lot about the origins and history of it. And so it was very helpful for people to understand where we were coming from. And when we talk about the patriarchy, what exactly we were talking about. And if you haven't seen the first one, when you're done watching this live one, go watch the first one. It's definitely a good primer to understand the subject matter.
Yeah, that's right. I had a lot of similar feedback from people, and it was interesting to me that in the lead up to episode 1, we had so much hysteria and hype and aggression thrown at us from the feminists and the gamma males who were really anticipating it being a bit of a hate fest, and we have had literally no thumbs downs on the first episode. Lots of thumbs up, lots of views, and lots of great comments. So I wonder, are these crazy feminist haters even willing to show up to the conversation and listen to what's said? I don't think they're watching at all. They're just into the Twitter wars. So I really hope that some of them will join us tonight, and that, they can raise their questions, they can voice their objections, and not just, support and argue for their preconceptions, many of which are based on lies. And I think we're going to get into that in great depth tonight.
And not so much not really just or so much based on their lies, but based on lies they've been told.
That's what I mean.
Well,
yeah.
they've been propagandized against the entire concept of working inside of a structure, period, let alone working in a structure where competent high agency men take the lead. That it's difficult for them to imagine that. Many people have never been in that kind of a structure before. And that really brings up the topic that we're talking about today. Do we live in a patriarchy? And this is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have, is that in the Western world right now, we have some sort of a hegemonic patriarchy that controls everything. And I'm not even straw manning. That is, basically the word for word what people are saying.
Oh yeah.
And I think that they can say this because they've never lived in an actual patriarchy, so they have nothing to compare it to. And when we say, do we live in a patriarchy, we have to understand that that's not a very nuanced question. Because does that mean you and I? Does that include feminists? Does that include everybody?
What's your scale of resolution that you're examining at?
Exactly. So we could say, for example, do we live in a democracy? Well, yes, we elect a certain very small number of political leaders at the top of the government, but then the entire rest of the government's made up of people who are appointed, people who are often there for their entire lives. And they make the vast majority of the decisions in government are made by non-elected people. So do we have a democracy? Well, technically, yes, but actually most of the decisions are made at the individual level. And with a patriarchy, it's relatively the same thing. Most of the decisions are made at, each person decides what they eat for the breakfast themselves. That is, there's not a top-down order for everything. But on the other hand, not everything is under a patriarchy. So you and I, we're fathers, we're husbands, we're patriarchs. And we organize our family structure, and probably a lot of your friends do as well, and a lot of my friends do. We organize our family structure according to a patriarchy. We ensure that our wife and our children have the protection, have our protection. And we associate with people generally who are like that as well. But one of my friends, Gerald Walsh, he said they're still calling a fatherless society a patriarchy. So the lying feminists have disqualified themselves from explaining society. If you do not understand that we are living in a society where fatherhood is no longer a completely common thing for people, calling that a patriarchy is not sensible. There's a link that I sent you before, and it talks about the ratio of how many people are being born out of marriage. So basically that means how many people are being born without a father figure present in the home. For whites, since 1990 to 2016, it's increased from 15% to 28%. So nearly a third of whites are living in a fatherless home.
And
For blacks,
it's just about doubled since 1990.
Yeah, just about doubled.
Yeah.
In basically a generation.
And I would dare say that if we had a stat for 1950 or 1960, we would see much, much lower rates at that time as well. So the curve is definitely upwards. There is an upward trend of fatherlessness in the West.
Exactly. And it's even become popular amongst celebrities. A lot of celebrities talking about how, I don't remember who it was, one of them saying that, she doesn't want a father in her son's life because she doesn't want him being exposed to toxic masculinity. As if she is
but she'll take the sperm.
Yeah. Well, it's as if she is incapable of attracting a man that she would feel comfortable with, and yet she's a celebrity.
Yeah.
It says a lot to her personal dysfunctions that she's unable to do that. For blacks, it's more than two-thirds of them are raised without a father in the home. Young black men, no protection, no mentorship from a father, no opportunity to grow up learning what it means to be a man. This is a terrible situation. Young women left without that good example of a man, so that it's easier for them then to compare and pick a good husband. It is a real tragedy that both of our communities are having this problem. Now,
there's a real it's really important to understand this particular stat, especially as it relates to blacks in the West, because there's a stark overrepresentation of crime from blacks compared to any other racial group, particularly in America, which is where most of these stats come from. And people are very quick to assume that it's just, racial differences, that it's inherent to the race. But the truth is, if we're not seeing these stats coming from a black community that has a stable family, as it very much used to in the past, that's not coming from a Christian, Western ethic as it used to in the past, that hasn't been corrupted by the cultural cancer that has sort of, really created this ghetto gangster culture that's very inherent to a lot of Black American culture. If we're looking at Black culture from just that perspective, with those problems as part of it, then we're not seeing the full potential of these people. And so this community, for whatever reasons, have caused this epidemic of fatherlessness in the Black community. It's that fatherlessness that is stripping that community of its potential. And we don't know what's possible if that could be repaired.
Well, the even more scary thing is that if that change happened in the Black community, it can happen in the white community as well, as fatherhood is undermined.
Yeah, and it's happening, behind
happening.
The Black community, but we're beginning to catch up.
And the way that young white men tend to deal with their problems of lack of masculine influence in their life is different than the way young Black men deal with it. There will be cultural differences in how people deal with trauma. And we see a very high suicide rate amongst young white men. We see a high rate of mental illness and eating disorders and other things amongst young white women. And they're dealing with the lack of the anxiety caused from living in the chaos of not having a father in the home. They're dealing with it differently, but it's still an extremely negative outcome. And
I guess this really highlights that for us, our focal point and our definition of what is the patriarchy, why is it natural and why is it good, is because it begins with what I believe is the smallest unit of society, which is the family, not the individual, the family. And, for the feminists who rail against us and rail against this conversation because they've got this idea of the patriarchy being the dominance of men in government, in the corporate world, in the STEM fields, all of these areas where they feel that men are unfairly overrepresented because of oppression of women. That's their definition of patriarchy. And what we're saying is no, that the natural order and the reason why the structures of larger macro-societal organization are oriented, when they're healthy, around a patriarchy is because the family is naturally that way. And the family is healthiest and strongest when it is in line with that natural order of the patriarchy.
And even if you do not organize things at a national level in a patriarchal structure, if you have it at the family level, you get most of the benefits of the patriarchy because you have that intimate and close relationship with masculinity that children need, that women need in order to feel secure. And you mentioned a couple of areas there. So in government, most voters in the West are women. The reality is that women can, it's a democracy. You get one more vote than the other side, you control the government. And women are the largest pool of voters. They vote more often, there's more of them. And so they actually, the current Western governments are all chosen by women.
But they're choosing men to be in these high offices, so they're obviously choosing wrong from the feminist perspective. And so what we need is a feminarchy instead of a matriarchy. We need just the feminists to vote, and then they can put the whammon folk that they want up the top in those offices.
Well, and we can see, since we could say it could be legitimate to say that before universal suffrage, that Western governments were organized on a patriarchal structure. Although I would say it would even be before universal suffrage, when it was only people who had a economic stake in the commons that were voting. But if you go back that far, you get definitely to a more patriarchal structure at the government level. But we can see what happens the moment that we get universal suffrage. We have 2 world wars.
Yeah.
So almost right away afterwards. And that's when we start getting the massive increase in government, the creation of the welfare state, which is essentially the transfer money from men to women's state. Men pay about twice as
fashion. Yeah,
in a non-voluntary fashion. Men pay about twice as much taxes as women, and we collect about half as much money. Men are on average net tax payers. Women on average are net tax consumers.
And right here, we see a very fundamental explanation for this trend in fatherless homes, because it was just economically unviable for a woman to raise a family if she didn't have a man around who, was out bringing home the bacon to pay for it all. But now she doesn't need that. The government will pick up the bill. And as you're pointing out, statistically here, that money is coming from other men. So it's the patriarchs in the traditional families who are, out working hard, and they're paying for their own family, but then all of that tax that gets taken from them is paying for some other guy's kids as well. And we're cucked as a result. We're forcibly cucked by our welfare system, that we pay the tax that will pay for other men's children, these men who have abandoned their families or who have donated sperm to these feminist women who don't want to have a man around and want to raise children without that structure. So yeah, the resources are being moved through violence, and I guess most people who watch The Rational Rise and watch our shows and follow us on Twitter would already, be red-pilled enough to understand that taxation is theft and theft is violence. But that's essentially what it is, that hardworking family men in a lot of cases, or even single men who are wanting to start a family and who haven't maybe who can't afford to buy their own home yet, so that they can, put a ring on a beautiful lady and bring her into the castle and make a family with them. They can't afford it because they're paying so much tax for other people's children. And it's a terrible state.
And very often those other people don't even live in your country.
Yeah.
Since our countries donate so much money to other countries, very often donating large amounts of resources to those countries so that they can have many, many children, and weakening the families in those other countries as well. If you really want to break this down, the feminist push for universal suffrage led directly to the creation of the welfare state, which led directly to the erosion of the Black family, and is the number one reason for the higher Black crime rate and for the destruction. And when I say higher, at minimum, I mean higher compared to what it was before the welfare state came in. At minimum, we can compare those. I think that's a very fair comparison. And that has all been the result of feminists agitating for the vote. I think this is a very, very clear line of progression. And I don't think it was intentional, but there are unintended consequences when you mess with a system that was working. You will get unintended consequences. You know,
and now that we're seeing them, we need to have an honest conversation about, you know, do we wind these programs back, like welfare, like universal suffrage? You know, is there a rational cause to reassess these things? And this is where you start hitting taboos. This is where you start treading on sacred cows, because to even suggest that universal suffrage or the female vote or the universal vote for men, even, you know, all men, regardless of their economic situation, regardless of whether they have skin in the game, regardless of whether they have a family or a business or are a net taxpayer rather than a, you know, a grifter living off the public purse, to even raise these questions now, you just get slapped with so much, well, it's GSRRM, you know, that's what you get slapped with. And we talked about that last week, and maybe I'll bring that graphic up again. For those who didn't see, this is an important thing to understand in the fight for honest, rational truth about these delicate political topics. You need to be able to recognize the tactics that are used against you when you try to raise these things in a calm and rational way. What they hit you with is, well, the full list is shaming, moralizing, psychologizing, ridiculing, rallying, gossiping, propagandizing, undermining, reputation destruction. And, you know, we see it all the time. We receive it all the time. And it has been very, very effective in perpetuating these systems like universal suffrage, like welfarism, and the lies like that we still live under a patriarchy and it's the sole cause or the root cause of all the problems in the world. That's how those lies are perpetuated, is through shutting you up through shaming, essentially. And, you know, I mean...
And there's a very specific reason that the GSRRM is used instead of arguments or force. And if men recognized that the reinstallation of a patriarchy or the return to a patriarchy in the West is simply a matter of us choosing to do it, then that would be, that we would be unstoppable. If we chose to do it, there is no force that could stop us. We were the ones that chose this experiment with universal suffrage. We allowed it. Gave women the vote.
Yeah.
They didn't take it because they're incapable of taking it. We gave it to them. And if we were one day to decide to take it back, you know, if you had enough men to decide to do that, then it would happen and there wouldn't be a lot that could be done about it.
And it's
I think
amazingly easy for at the individual level. It's harder to sell it to the masses of men, but that's what we're working at. But it's amazingly easy as an individual to swallow that pill once you understand these ideas like GSRRM and the difference, you know, between rhetoric and dialectic and all of these things. Once you begin to spend some time with these ideas and chew on them for a bit, you swallow that pill and you realize you have no power over me. This thing has no power over me unless I choose to let it, unless I recoil in shame and curl up in the fetal position and be a little mama's boy like I used to be. Your words and your insults and your ridicule and shaming don't change nothing unless I choose to let them. And that's the big red pill against feminism for men.
And for a lot of men, you know, I will talk to men about this, or even to women. And I've had feminists say this as well. If men are so much stronger and better men are also better in a lot of ways at organizing themselves to accomplish tasks, physical tasks in the real world, how come women were able to use words to overcome men. And we have to understand that while men are physical super predators, so we're super predators in the physical realm, in the making of actual things happen, women are social emotional super predators. They are extremely competent at controlling those around them using words, basically. Yeah. And this is why, in general, men have and this is throughout Western history, especially. This is why you will really only see universal suffrage as a Western thing, and a few cultures that have imitated the Western model, such as Japan and a few others. Men have a massive reluctance to make women do anything. We want to take leadership, but we don't want to make anybody do anything. In fact, we tend to not want to impose our will on anyone. And a lot of people, they see the patriarchy as merely imposing of will, but it's more about imposing reciprocity. So it's saying that if you like, you can separate and go over there and do your own thing. But if you want to keep receiving benefits from my presence, we have to come to a deal that's mutually beneficial. Reciprocity is another way to say that, is it has to be mutually beneficial.
Yes. Yeah.
And or mutually harmful would be reciprocity too, but we prefer mutually beneficial. We want to create a win-win situation.
Yeah, and mutually harmful is only the last resort when separation is not accepted. When they won't leave you alone, well, now we will be reciprocal in a way that you won't like. And that's certainly not what we want to start with, but it's where it ends up. And that's why our nations degenerate into war over and over again, because one group won't leave the other alone.
Anytime you have a complete dissolution of the patriarchy in a culture, not even the complete, but if it gets sufficiently weak that it cannot withstand the pressures that are around it, we'll see it collapse. And we see this with the decay. The Roman philosophers talking about the decay of masculinity in ancient Rome and comparing it to their ancestors a few generations before, who were much more in touch with what it meant to be a man and to lead and to be a patriarch. Then they start to decay, and along comes invaders who they described them as being much more masculine than the young men of Rome. Young men of Rome had become soft and weak, and they preferred sex parties and drinking and having fun, and that's what they preferred rather than masculine, productive, and protective pursuits.
All those good times made some weak men.
Exactly, and this is a cycle that goes throughout history. And as the West, we've allowed women control most of the vote. Women control about 70% of the world's finances, or at least in the West, 70% of the finances. They're the ones that choose what gets bought. And so companies cater to them. So they have the political and the corporate world. Most people who go to church are women. So churches very often will cater to what women need. And that's why we see so many converged churches, because women are all about it. In general, tend to be about acceptance, although I'm meeting a lot of young women now that wish the church would be more strict.
And all of this, when you just look at where we're at today, look at this slice of time and the time in which our generation and younger generations have grown up, we have been born into well-established world of lies, world of feminism being, pretty predominant, being the norm. And what we're doing now is a great rebellion and resistance against what we grew up with. And for me, it's a 180-degree turn from my views and my values that I thought were my own when I was younger, but they were just what was taught to me and the lies that I was told. And so you have to be willing to engage in conflict on some level to resist the status quo and to speak out against the things that we now see are, incredibly damaging and basically genocidal to the white race, to Western civilization. These cultural norms that are killing us, we have to be willing to engage in serious conflict. And, most of that conflict at the moment for us is just people being mean on the internet. And as soon as you get thick enough skin to deal with that, you're through the bulk of it, you're through the worst of it for now. But it's going to escalate unless we start to turn it around. So what we need is more men to be willing to engage in conflict with women, with the gamma males, with the feminists, with the establishment, and just say, no, that's irrational, it doesn't work, it's a lie, and we're not going to agree to that anymore. And if enough men do that, well, we turn the tide. And we've seen it happen before. There have been times in recent recorded history where the weakening, it happened up and down like a yo-yo in Rome, and it's happened in the European nations over the last 100 years a couple of times, where the culture has become so feminized, so demoralized, so depraved, and then there's been an upswing of masculinity, of strength, of tradition, of patriarchy, of religion, a resurgence of belief in God, a resurgence of pride in the culture and the race that you come from, and that strength grows with it, and the pendulum swings once more, and I think we're really seeing the beginning of this right now in all across the West, and it's an exciting time to be part of it and to be willing to get in the fight.
And I think understanding it as a cycle is very important. It's easy to get black-pilled because we'll see a trend that's happened during our lifetime, like that trend of single motherhood, and we'll assume that trend will continue forever, and the end result is we're all dead. And it's, I would joke to people that would complain about this, and I'd say, oh yeah, man, this morning it was really bright outside, and now it's getting evening, it's getting darker and darker. I wonder if it'll stay dark forever. No, this is a cycle.
Yeah.
Everything that's bad is a cycle. Now, hopefully we're slowly cycling up throughout history. There's no guarantee of that, but that's hopefully what we're doing. And we've had major setbacks. We had the Dark Ages, we've had other major setbacks. And for young men, understanding that there is hope out of this, and that it's going to be based on them demonstrating agency and having egos that, as we mentioned, if women are super predators in the emotional and are capable of being super predators in the emotional and word side of things, we have to become immune to that. That means that our ego can't be based on the approval of women. If we base our ego on virtues that we demonstrate, we're going to be able to get past any of that criticism. So you'll notice a lot of that shaming is designed to say, you're not masculine, you're not manly. And if you're a man and you have some weaknesses in these areas, maybe you're not really living up to your potential, they're going to find those weaknesses and expose that chink in your armor. And you can look at that and go, this is terrible, look what they're doing to me. Or you can go, oh, thank you for exposing this weakness in my armor. Now I know where I need to work on things and fix myself. And look at it as you're going out to battle, and where do you need to reinforce things? Where do you need, men who are going to enter into the conflicts that you mentioned, we need to be bigger, faster, stronger, than we would have been otherwise. We need to be more than we would have been if we just want to shut up and not rock the boat. A lot of people say, I can't talk about these things because it will interfere with my job.
Well, that's where people are at the most risk, is that economic attack.
Yeah, that economic attack right now, that's the only place they can really hurt you. And the solution to that is to become so good at what you do that people don't care what you believe in your personal life, because they need your service. You are, that's basically what we have done. We have become so good at what we do that these attacks actually strengthen us.
Yeah, that's it. And I guess for me, my instinct has always been to go my own way as far as, my economic wanderings and my projects, so I haven't had a job where I've had a boss since I was, 17 years old and packing shelves at a supermarket. Ever since then, it's been, I'm self-employed, I'm my own boss, and I move from project to project, and I work with different people, and it's on a voluntary basis. So now if somebody for any reason decides they don't want my services, whether it's because my services are not useful to them or because we have a insurmountable political difference of opinions, it doesn't matter. We just go, okay, well that relationship's closed, and now I can move on. But the truth is, I'm in lots of different economic relationships with different people, and most of them, as you say, they don't give a damn about what my politics are, because our relationship, our interactions are based on respect, reciprocity, voluntary exchange of services and money, and everyone's happy. And, if you surround yourself with friends and family and hopefully employers or colleagues who mature like that, then you've got a bit of a buffer around you and a bit of a protective element. It's when you go and work for these converged organizations that usually slap their feminist propaganda right up on the front wall, or they make you swear an oath to it when they take you on as an employee. And it's important for men who are aware of this stuff, who are interested in this stuff, and who want to support Western civilization and sustain it and help it become strong again. It's important for us to be aware of these things, be aware of GSRRM, be aware of feminism, be aware of the converged organizations, and just do our best to steer clear of them.
And to know how to counter it as well. I think it's useful to know how to counter it, what arguments counter it, very often just calling it out. It's like, I think it was Gandalf, and he's like, he stomps his stick and he says, your words you have no power here. To the corrupt.
You shall not pass.
Yeah. And we basically, we're going to have to do that. You have no power over me. I am not affected by you. You cannot harm me.
Yes.
And once that is known, it frustrates them sufficiently. It short circuits their amygdala. Yeah. Because the only power they have, and for a lot of, if you're a woman who relies on the welfare state, and you understand that men becoming men again would probably mean the end of the welfare state, and you rely on that for your bread and butter because you don't want to actually work,
or be virtuous enough to find a
or
partner,
be virtuous enough to attract a man, yeah, or do add value to society in some way.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to do that, then it is a life and death struggle for you, and you are viewing it as my ability to survive month to month is predicated on my ability to control men through my words. And when a man comes along and says, "You can't control me," I'm immune to you. It doesn't work.
Yep.
They feel fear, real existential fear. And that is important for them to feel that as early as possible. So hopefully they make the changes necessary to survive what is coming, because we can't continue in the current course of action. Either we'll get an external patriarchy, will take over the West, which is kind of happening with the immigration of Islam into the West, or we will have a internal patriarchy coming up, either a benevolent one or maybe a malevolent one. It depends how angry we make young men.
Yeah, that's right. Which one do you want? Like, there's no way out. A patriarchy is coming, and it's either an Islamic one, or a white Western one that's nice to you, or a white Western one that's mean to you. And obviously what we want and what we try to model, in our own lives, to our sons, to the people around us, and online in our dealings is the nice kind, to be a good, chivalrous, honorable, virtuous man who looks after his family, who looks after his community, who invests heavily in the commons and protects the commons, and rallies other men to do the same thing, for a greater cause that's bigger than ourselves. And I think, part of the reason why the feminist rhetoric is so geared towards this stuff, like the future is female, we don't need men anymore, toxic masculinity, this demonization and pretty flagrant misandry that we see coming from the feminist world. It's because they have to defend the single mother family structure. Why? Because I think the propagandists who push this message know, and the women intuit, that the way to control men is to raise them without fathers. To make a man subject to that desire to please women, to make a man weak, weakened by his desire to be accepted and approved of by the women, you need to raise him without a father, because then he's a mama's boy. Then his mother has used shame his whole life, and disapproval and disappointment, and how could you do this to me? I'm your poor mother. Like all of this manipulation stuff that happens a lot in single mother households. Not every single mother. Obviously, there are some who are widows. There are some whose husbands have turned out to be real jerks, and they're dealing with a bad situation. So there are some exceptional.
Well, there's some that made a lot of bad decisions when they were younger. Then they find out reality when they get older.
Yes.
But they can't change what they've done in the past. They can take responsibility and do the best they can.
That's right. And we applaud those women who do that, who wake up to reality, who realize their errors, and who try to.
It's hard.
Compensate.
It's hard to admit you made big mistakes.
Yeah, and it's hard to compensate for those mistakes as well. But again, if your instinct is to admit your fault, and same for men who've abandoned their families, same for single fathers, same for anyone, when you can admit where you've made an error, and look at that chink in your armor, and be mature enough and strong enough and high agency enough to recognize it and work on it, and then invest in your own virtue and develop your agency and become better than you were, then you really are made of great stuff, and we admire that. But for a lot of these rabid feminists, as you say, it's just our selected heightened amygdala responses to an insatiable need for resources that must come from other people's labor. And they have to promote this single mother household and demonize men, because the moment that the pendulum starts to swing back towards traditional patriarchal families with strong male leadership, and with that strong maternal leadership in their proper domains, where they recognize the place of the mother, the place of the father, how powerful they are together as a team, and what a wonderful upbringing they're going to give their children, that next generation is going to be a very, very strong generation of men and women, but particularly the men are going to be impervious to the kind of stuff that our generation we've had to kind of fight to become strong against it. Our sons are going to be very strong against it, because they're going to be educated properly and have the right role models and have the right messaging given to them from early on. So, I mean, it's extremely dangerous. We are extremely dangerous to feminism because of the message we're promoting and the way we're raising our children.
Yes, and we have to understand, too, that they have invested in a model that's not sustainable. And we're telling them that the model's not sustainable. They kind of know it deep down inside. They're not completely stupid.
That's why they freak out.
They're foolish, not stupid.
Yeah.
And so they know deep down inside it's an unsustainable model, but they all hope, especially since many of them don't have children, they all hope that it'll at least last long enough that they don't feel the repercussions of it. And it's like you mentioned, it's an our selected are not concerned with their neighbor, only with themselves. And if they can avoid consequences, it's fine if everybody else gets eaten as long as I can escape. That's what the rabbit thinks. And so it's a very different, and it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to understand that, who have not lived in that world. I've interviewed people that were feminists in the past. They came to a realization that wasn't making them happy, and they changed their behavior. And when we talk about it afterwards, it's hard for them to think, how did I end up in that place? How did I end up there? How did I end up thinking these things that now I realize rationally are so wrong? And it's important for us to understand that it's very, very easy for humans to trick themselves, to trick themselves, or to follow an idea that we know isn't true, but is very tempting to us. We have the story of the Garden of Eden and the temptation of Adam and Eve for a reason. They were tempted with an apple. They were told, hey, a nice shiny apple, or you can live forever in a paradise. And they chose the apple. It's not a rational decision, but people choose the shiny, sweet thing, the thing that's going to give them instant pleasure, over the long-term goal if they're not careful. And that's where it comes to developing agency. And, for young men, if you want to be part of the solution and you're a young man or a young woman, you need to work on your agency. I've written a lot about that, given specific exercises that people can do. And a lot of this is things your father should have done with you. I teach my son agency. I will give him tasks in which he will learn agency in a way that it's not clear to him that's what's happening, but he develops those abilities. And this way, it will be natural for him to demonstrate agency when he's older. For many people, they've not even seen someone with agency. I very often have clients, and I'm asking them about their friends because it makes such a huge impact. What were your parents like? What were your friends like? They're very often the highest agency person in their peer group.
Mm.
And this is why they're coming to get coaching, because high agency people, they look for mentors, they look for help, they look for ways to increase their agency further, whereas low agency people, they don't have enough agency to develop agency sometimes, not without a lot of help.
And I guess they often are quite happy being the high agency person of their group, because it doesn't challenge them to anything greater, And I know when I was younger, in some ways I was guilty of this, that I would choose people to be my friends who were a bit broken so that I could, and I wasn't cognizant of it at the time. I think when I became aware that I was doing this, I started to change it. But part of me wanted to be the strongest, wisest, and smartest person in the room at all times, so that I didn't have to look at just how weak and stupid and foolish I was in a lot of ways. And as you say, as my agency developed, I realized very quickly I need mentors. I need people who are, making more money than me, who have happier lives than me, who are, achieving their dreams more than me, who are fitter and stronger and could kill me, easily. I need these men around me to sharpen me and to help me grow into something better than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're, young man out there and you're looking to be part of that solution, go develop your agency and go be around men like James just described. Go out there, find the place where you're not the smartest one in the room. And to get into that room, there's going to be a cost. This
Humility
is
is
something,
the
if you're a
first
young
one.
man, if it's too easy to get into a group, that means that you don't want to be in that group.
I think he meant it in a different way, but Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't want to be part of any club that would have me.
Yeah, exactly. You have to look for the place where you have to have some sort of a buy-in. There are cultural clubs in Europe here where you have a buy-in. I've heard of ones where the buy-in's as high as 10,000 euros. It's because they say if you don't have skin in the game, you're not going to. A lot of these are connected with orders of knights and things like this. If you don't have some skin in the game, how can we trust that you're not just going to come here and waste our time? Or worse, be some sort of infiltrator or
undermine,
somehow destructive. And so it's not just a buy-in of money. They will expect you to add value in other ways. And the reality is the antidote to all of these problems is learning how to add value. Once you can add more value than you need to consume, you no longer fear a return to patriarchy and return to reciprocity. If you look at the kind of women that complain about the patriarchy, the non-existent patriarchy in the West, there are certain characteristics that are similar about these women. They make choices in life which lead them to not have a lot of value. They don't take, not every single one of them, but in general, they're not adding a lot of value in any way. They're not making those around them better off by their existence. And because of that, they're very afraid of there are a lot of men like this too. The gamma males that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Because they don't add value, the concept of reciprocity is scary to them. They have a lot of fear around that idea. And those who add value, the concept of reciprocity is extremely attractive because they know that they will get that return to them. And so the more value you learn to add to the world, are you making your friends stronger? Are you really do you have a skill that you can really contribute to? the world, or, you know, are you flipping hamburgers?
Yeah, and I think
You know,
that's a key ingredient. It has been for me, and I think this could be universalized, that developing the ability to add value that would be valuable in any situation, in any time in history. That isn't, esoteric, modern internet economy value. That stuff is fine because that's the world we live in today. But if there was a massive EMP tomorrow and the internet's gone, or McDonald's goes bankrupt, like that'll happen, and there's no burger
or they
flipping jobs
replace you with
anymore.
robots.
How can you be of value to your neighbors? And this is where that's the best place to start. Is like, do you know your neighbors to begin with? If you're in a unit building, do you know the people who live upstairs and downstairs and immediately next to you? Do you know the people across the fence? If not, get to know them, and then figure out the smallest ways that you can be of service to your immediate community, and that can grow from there. But to know that you have some basic survival or community building skills that are of universal value that you are willing to provide is a great foundation. Because I know that if all of this fell apart that I'm doing with Rationalized TV, if the music industry completely imploded and I never got another gig, I know I can build. I've built a studio. I've built buildings. I have physical skills. I can hunt. To some degree, I can fight. I have the courage to join a local militia and protect my community against aggressors if that were ever to be the case. So to know that you have some real world tangible skills that you can fall back upon is a great way to develop your agency, to develop your self-efficacy and your sense of pride in yourself. And if you're a single man and you're developing those skills, it also makes you very attractive to quality women or quality people of the opposite sex. And, becoming a father for me was a really big step in feeling the need to develop those skills. Like, what can I give my sons? What can I do to protect my family and make sure we've got shelter and make sure we've got food and make sure that we're living in a good community who will look after us? And, we've become so rootless and so atomized in the modern world and so attached to these screens through which we interact with people that we've lost sight of, what it's like to be part of a real club or a real community where you're belly to belly with people. And, you were talking about buy-ins before with clubs. Martial arts dojos are an excellent example of that. When you begin in most dojos, you're at the back and you get the least opportunity to speak. You get the least coaching and training in a lot of ways, and you've got to humble yourself against the more senior members of the club. And in some really traditional like kung fu clubs and that sort of thing, you have to do menial shitty tasks and just watch for a long time before you even get the opportunity.
Wax on, wax off.
Exactly. So humility and patience can be the buy-in as well, and you can do that now just with your neighbors. Just go and humble yourself before your neighbors and just say. And I can't remember where this advice came from, but I thought it was a great piece of advice. Is when you move to a new area or if you want to connect with your neighbors, the best thing to do is go and ask your neighbors for a cup of sugar. Go and ask them for something, because that humbles you and it puts you in a position of vulnerability and it gives them an opportunity to be kind and be of service. Make it small, don't make it, can I borrow your car? I've never met you, make it something that's just an opportunity for people to show their kindness to you, and then know that you owe them, and build on that reciprocity. And it's a great way to establish your place in a community.
And if there's something you need, beyond a cup of sugar, imagine you're a young man or woman and you're looking to get married and you have some specific things you're looking for. You want to marry someone that is family oriented, someone that wants to have a traditional family structure. Get out there and talk to people about this. Don't keep it a secret. Everyone should know what you're looking for. And you would be surprised how much joy people get out of helping other people, especially in non-economic ways. People get a lot of joy out of introducing people to other people, out of helping people make friends, out of helping people find a mate. My wife used to do this a lot for her friends. She had she had it organized until she had actually 2 lists and information about the different people. And she'd be like, I'm gonna organize a party because I think these people and these people would make good friends, or this guy and this woman, I know they're both looking to get married and they're the right ages, and I think they would be good together. And it gave her a lot of joy. She didn't get any reward economically for this, but she got a lot of joy. She was adding value to her peer group, to her local commons. And the
Building
joy
community.
she got from that was the reward, her local community. Exactly.
Yeah. And to invest in your community in that way is so invaluable. And I guess this stuff is very inherent to the church. You know, if you're a Christian and you're part of a church, you probably already understand a lot of these concepts, because this is what's done all the time. Is it's all about service and, you know, networking and making sure everyone's looking out for one another in that environment, and building those commons. But in an increasingly atheistic post-church society, you know, people need to start doing it in other ways, because I guess the church used to be the center of town. You know, it used to be the place where everyone came together at the same time and got to know each other. And the degree to which the church has become less central to our Western villages and towns and cities is the degree to which we've become atomized as well. So, you know, I highly recommend joining a church, but if you're not going to do that, invite your neighbors over for a barbecue. That's something. That's a good start.
Invite your neighbors over for a barbecue. And I think one of the is great. And I think one of the reasons why the church was so effective at bringing people together is because there was a shared tool for resolving conflicts within the group. You know, when it comes down to it, conflicts in the end can always be resolved with violence. But there's a big cost to resolving conflicts with violence. You could end up dead. It could cycle into a complete commons destroying, a community destroying thing. And we want to avoid that. We want to have low cost methods of resolving conflicts. And so there was a set of common rules and ways that people resolve social conflicts. If you are creating community, that's one of the things you need to think about. What is it going to be? You know, basing things on reciprocity is a great start. You may not want to go to church, but you can base your community's way of resolving conflicts on the Christian ethos of loving your neighbor, and limiting that to those who reciprocate that back. You have to come up with some way that you deal with each other that promotes peace and unity within the group. As long as you do that and you start building those communities, you're creating something that's independent of any other structures that will come and go as time goes on. You know, it will be a tendency for these structures to shift into a patriarchal structure, because as men take the lead in their sphere, in the provide and protect, as women take the lead in their sphere in the maternal areas, will form naturally back into the structure that had the least resistance. You know, running things as a patriarchy is the easiest way for us to live in the long run. It's certainly not easy now, where we have, you know, fatherless kids have 4 times greater risk of poverty. Fatherless girls are 7 times more likely to get pregnant as a teen. They're much more likely to have behavioral problems, to be abused as children. They're more likely to die in infancy, about twice as likely. There's a whole load of other, they're more likely to be involved in crime, going to prison, dropping out of high school. The effects of not having a patriarchal structure are enormous. And so we will shift back towards that when we get together again. A big part of the way that men have been kept under control is by isolating us, so that we're isolated from other men, but exposed to women. You'll see this with young boys. If they're raised in a single mother family or a household, they don't see any man. They go to school, they're taught by women. And then sometime in their teen years, they'll meet a man in school. They'll meet their first male teacher. And that's their first experience with an actual real life human man. Maybe they've met a couple of their mother's low quality boyfriends, but I mean, an actual potential example. And so for a lot of young men, they're isolated from men. They're often around women. And this leaves them, as we mentioned before, vulnerable to wanting to please women at all costs. And get out and hang out with other men, get together with other men, start creating things, and don't just go out, you don't want to look for drinking buddies. You want to look for accomplishing something, friends.
Yep.
Look for raiding partners. Look for
join a sports, join a soccer or football club, rugby club. Get in a team sport. Join a dojo. Brush up against other men. Spar with other men who are much stronger and better at fighting than you are. Join a hunting club. Join a rifle club. There are so many activities that are directly related to masculine skills and patriarchal skill-based building. So many opportunities out there to do it. You have to be willing to humble yourself and know that you're probably going to be the weakest and least knowledgeable and wise when you show up. And that's part of it. That's putting skin in the game. That's the buy-in. And it's such a rewarding experience to do it. So I highly recommend it. Yeah. It's the times that I've been involved in martial arts dojos have been incredibly, character building for me. Especially when I was that younger guy who wanted to be the smartest guy and the best guy in the room, and I had to be the weakest and stupidest when it came to learning a martial art.
I have a lot of young men said to me, it's so hard to buy a house nowadays to get, the kinds of things that my grandfather had before he got married, or at least the save up the money for it. And what I suggest is get together with those other men. First, prove to each other that you can work together. And why don't, 3, 4, 5 young men split the cost, buy a starter home, fix it up, sell it, live in it until it's fixed up, sell it, and do this cycle until you guys get to the point where you each have the skills to renovate a home and you have each a home to live in. Make it a contract, make it a sacred oath, a pact between you that you're going to help each other out. And then work at it. I know people that have done that. It's worked out very well. There are some groups that have even bought a kind of rundown apartment building, and they bought the whole apartment building and they fixed it up unit by unit. And the advantage is they all end up living close to each other once they got married and had kids.
Yeah,
and
literally in a castle with your tribe. It's awesome.
Exactly. We used to do this. We used to get together with a bunch of other guys and go, okay, let's go out into the American or Australian frontier, found a city, build it from the sticks and logs and dirt and rocks that we find here, while we're half starving to death trying to get it going, and make a community. You got your community, women appear.
Yes. Yep. And we swear
build civilization
to protect those women and protect each other and protect our investment together, and that's the beginning of civilization right there.
Yeah, and that's when you start getting into a real true patriarchy, where you have not just the family, but you have the super family, the larger group of people, so that your children, your sons, for example, they have all of that example of other men in your tribe. Your daughters, they know what masculine is. They will have a very high standard for what they expect for a husband. Your sons will have a high standard of what they expect in themselves and what they expect from women. And it's going to offer you a kind of peace and tranquility that you can't get from your living by yourself, from just being one atomized man living in the cosmopolitan sea. And this is really the goal this will really be what stabilizes our future society. We're not going to see a lot of successful top-down solutions. We're going to see bottom-up solutions, and they start with getting together with other men and spending time with them and creating these organizations that do things, that exercise their agency in the world and make things happen.
Excellent. And in the more immediate, for those who are watching tonight, it starts with supporting these conversations. So please make sure you hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed our conversation tonight about the patriarchy. Please make sure you share this with somebody who you think would get value out of it, and share it with young men and women, or old men and women, anyone who you think needs to understand this stuff and is willing to engage in a nuanced, long-form conversation about it. And most importantly, support us in continuing this show and all of the other shows that we're producing and collaborating with at The Rational Rise by heading over to rationalrise.tv. That's our new independent platform. It's not on YouTube. We're hosting it ourselves. We've invested a lot of time and energy and money into getting this thing off the ground, and more people are coming on board. So do check it out, rationalrise.tv. This has been our second episode of Patriarch Hour with Noah Revoy. Thanks for joining me again tonight, Noah.
Thank you, James, for hosting this.
Absolute pleasure, and I look forward to hitting it again with you next week.
Awesome.
All right, and
Take
good night
care
to everyone at home. See you guys.